they weren't chosen by accident. Jurors in Disguise, a jury investigations podcast, exposes jurors who lied their way onto the jury to secure a guilty verdict. Each episode, owner and founder MaryRose Peterson pulls back the curtain on real cases, revealing misconduct buried in lies beyond the gavel. Visit us on YouTube at youtube.com/@juryinvestigations.
Hello and welcome to another podcast of Jurors in Disguise. My name is MaryRose Peterson and I own Covert Jury Investigations. What do? I'm glad you ask. We investigate juries to find the one or more jurors who lied during jury selection so they would be chosen and could then make sure that our clients were convicted. One question that I'm asked often is, how did you decide to be a jury investigator? Well, I don't know that I actually decided anything. What I know is that in 2011, the love story of MaryRose and Martin Peterson began. When I met Martin, he was driving over the road, so meeting in person wasn't much of an option since he was traveling all over the U.S. We began to talk on the phone every day for hours and hours and hours, and I loved every minute of it. That was in September of 2011. By February of 2012, we were getting serious. And Martin said one night after dinner, he said, I need to tell you some things that are going on. I knew Martin had been married before to someone who he met in 2005. At that time, she had a son who was 7 years old and a daughter who was 9. I knew that shortly after meeting this family, the woman was arrested for child neglect. She had been leaving the children at home in the apartment while she went to work. Martin not only had bailed her out of jail, but he helped her get the children out of foster care. He felt compelled to help his family because now they were not going to be allowed to stay in their apartment. He eventually married the woman and adopted the 2 kids. Things were going really well, and then they weren't. I knew that his wife had been unfaithful to him and that he said he wanted a divorce. What I did not know, but what I learned in February of 2012, was that Martin was going to be going to trial in May, literally for his life. If he lost this trial, he would face a life sentence with no chance of parole. The accusations had been made by his ex-wife while they were married and their daughter. They were allegations of sexual abuse. That was quite hard to hear. He told me there was a medical exam that proved his daughter was lying. I told him I didn't need to see the results of a medical exam to know that he did not do what he was being falsely accused of. There was so much about this that just didn't add up to me. For example, I didn't understand why, when the accusations were made, his then wife insisted on coming back to the house from the sheriff's office, told them that she didn't have any money and she would need to come back to the house. I knew from looking at Martin's divorce papers, which he showed me, that wasn't true. She had had an inheritance from her mother's passing and had tens of thousands in the bank. So that was a lie. She insisted on coming back to the house. Now, if your daughter told you that your husband had been abusing her, and I'm choosing my words carefully because social media likes to censor certain words, but if she told you that he had been doing these things in her bedroom, would you insist that she go back to that home and back to that bedroom? Why would you force your daughter to go back to the place where she said she'd been abused for 5 years every day. That was her testimony at one point. Why would you do that? I thought that was odd. His then wife would not take their daughter for a medical exam. 3 weeks later, she had to be ordered to take their daughter for a medical exam. Now, if you thought that your daughter was being abused, and she's only 15 years old, and this supposedly started when she was 10, why would you not take her to the doctor? Why would you not take her to the hospital? Why would you not take her for an examination to make sure she's okay? I thought that was odd. Another thing that didn't add up for me is that she would not file for divorce. Now, why would you want to stay married to somebody that you considered an abuser? 3 months after the accusations, Martin filed for divorce. To this day, now keep in mind, this happened in 2010. It is 2026. 16 years later, they are still Petersons. His ex-wife would not change her last name, would not change the children's last name. If these things were true, why would you want to keep his last name? You wouldn't want any reminder of him. Martin offered to pay for them to get their name changed back to what it was before he met them. She declined, wanted to stay a Peterson. Why? Another thing that did not add up is that shortly after Martin filed for divorce, he said his then wife told his attorney that she would move out of his home and all this would go away for $25,000. Martin said no. Then the number was reduced to $10,000. Again, he said no. Things about the behavior of his ex-wife at this point and daughter made no sense to me. And everything that Martin said lined up with the facts. I concluded that he was truly innocent and he had been falsely accused. So I assured him that I would be sticking around no matter what. Never envisioning that we would go to trial, there was a point when one of the jurors gave a very commanding speech. She basically said, he doesn't have to testify. He's already under attack. The state has the burden of proof. They have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm not going to hold it against him if he doesn't testify. Wow. Okay. We want her on the jury. I sat at trial listening to lie after lie. Everyone lied. His ex-wife lied, daughter lied, the son lied, and the best friend of his daughter became the outcry witness. He lied. Lie, lie, lie. Then I'm listening and the prosecutor's lying. The prosecutor's making things up. I sat there literally saying, you are making this up. None of this is true. Nothing I've heard today is true. It's all lies. Never even considered that all these people would come into court, take an oath, and swear to tell the truth, and then lie. I didn't see that coming. But that's exactly what happened. Lie after lie after lie. Within a few hours, the trial was over. The jury was released to deliberate, and it wasn't long before they came back in. They walked across the front of us and went and sat in the jury box. And as soon as they turned around, I knew. We lost. How is this possible? How is it possible? To add insult to injury, the foreperson was Rose, the person that just the day before gave that big speech. What happened? let me back up and say that at trial, the witnesses said they didn't know anything, they didn't hear anything, they didn't suspect anything. The only person that had anything to say was Martin's daughter. And her stories didn't line up. In fact, at one point, I thought we were going to go home because Martin's attorney asked his daughter to explain why at one point she said the abuse happened once or twice. And then at trial, she's saying that the abuse happened every day for 5 years. And she challenged her, asking, was it once or twice, or was it every day for 5 years? Martin's daughter actually said that once or twice is the same as every day. The same? It's not the same. It's not the same at all. And yet, there we were, guilty on all counts. Martin and I had teased about going to Las Vegas and getting married by Elvis. I saw all my dreams just gone, in an instant. Poof. No Vegas, no married, no Elvis. You were going to prison. Hard life. Fast forward 3 years later. We had appealed the conviction with the appellate court, and it was denied. The next weekend of visitation, I looked at Martin and I said, this isn't working. This isn't working. The appellate court agreed with the lower court. They agreed with the jury. I don't know how it's even possible, but they did. I went home after visitation and I was so grief-stricken that I didn't know what to do except try to put it out of my mind for a few hours to just kind of reset. And I pulled out my box of movies. Back in the day, we had DVDs. If you know me, you know that I am not a chick flick kind of girl. If something isn't getting blown up or somebody shot at, I am probably not going to watch it. I look down and I see the movie Runaway Jury. I felt so compelled to watch the movie. I can't really explain why, except it must have been God, because it's not a movie I would have chosen on my own. I was trying to get my mind off of all of this, and watching a movie about a trial and jurors was not something that I would have picked on my own. I watched the movie, and as I'm watching, I'm thinking to myself, that guy lied to get on the jury. I had been a jury foreperson once. When I got my jury summons, it was going to be for the very day that I started a brand new job. So I wore my suit, prepared to go to jury duty and get excused and go straight to work, start my training. I went to the courthouse. I explained why I can't be on this jury. I have a new job and my family needs the income and I'm supposed to be in training, so I can't be here. Well, the judge was not impressed and I got chosen. It's probably that dumb suit. I shouldn't have worn a suit. But I not only got chosen for the jury, but a week went by and in deliberations, I got chosen to be the foreperson. So I knew a little bit about trials and how juries worked, But at the beginning of jury selection, everyone takes an oath to swear to tell the truth during the jury selection, which is called a voir dire, which, as we know in French, means to speak the truth. So I never considered that someone would lie to get on a jury, because I tried really hard to get off the jury. But the movie made me think about that. He had an agenda. He had a reason for lying. So then I started thinking, well, I wonder, about our jurors. And of course, all of that with Rose came flooding back. And I thought, well, she gave that big speech, but then she became the foreperson. And boy, when she came out of that deliberation room, the daggers were coming out of her eyes. I mean, she was angry. So, did one of our jurors lie to get on the jury? Could it have been Rose? Then my focus turned to Rose and began to look to find her. I could not find a social media page on her, but what I did find was a social media page of someone that looked a lot like a young Rose. Looking through all of her photos, I found a picture of her and her mother and her grandmother. Turns out the mother was Rose. I knew instantly. I recognized her. I said, that's our juror. That's the foreperson. That's Rose right there. Continued to dig. What I was shocked to find was that on her daughter's page, there was a post of a movie. And when I looked to see who liked it, there was Martin's daughter's name. They were friends. And she had liked this post before trial. I thought, we're done here. I've got a connection between your daughter and the foreperson's daughter. We're done here. All that Rose would have to say if brought into court was, I had no idea that my daughter was friends with the accused daughter, with the defendant's daughter. Did not know they were friends. And she'd have been off the hook. Okay, well, we got to keep looking. Over the next 6 months, myself and a friend of mine who helped me locate Rose and several of her family members, we ultimately discovered that Rose's biological father, was a convicted sex offender in Connecticut. We discovered that Rose, although she had said she didn't know anyone in law enforcement, that her mother and her stepfather, who raised her, were both career law enforcement. They were also intimately involved with the Department of Children and Families, who was intimately involved in Martin's case because of the accusations. But she said she didn't know anybody in law enforcement. Well, that wasn't true. She said she didn't know anybody who'd been accused of a sex crime. That wasn't true. She said she didn't know anybody who had been a victim of a crime, and yet we found that she had accused multiple men of sexual assault. Ultimately, we discovered that she lied to every question asked of her during the jury selection. She even said she had 3 children. We found 4. And this whole Rose thing, her real name is Colette. Not Rose, Colette. We presented all of this evidence to the court. There was a point when the state attorney tried to argue it. And we caught the state attorney in altering transcripts and lying to the court. The day of the hearing in Hernando County, Florida, we were back in the courthouse, and the prosecutor wanted to talk about a plea deal. At that point, we had spent 4 years, 2 months, and 13 days in prison with multiple life sentences. We would have agreed to just about anything just to go home. By the end of the day, we had all come to an agreement of replacing the allegations with felony battery charge, time served, and a second charge of felony battery where Martin would do some probation. That night, I was sitting around the hotel pool with Martin, eating pizza. God did it. He did it. It worked. We were free. We were free. We were free because of Rose. That was in 2016. Here we are 10 years later, and I still thank God for Rose every day. If it weren't for Rose and all the lies that she told during jury selection, I don't know if Martin would have ever been able to come home. It was then that I realized the jury is the key to the conviction. You are convicted because those 6 or 12 people went into that little room and came out and said guilty. That's why Martin got convicted. It had nothing to do with the case. You could not possibly believe that once or twice is the same as every day. You couldn't possibly believe that. That's absurd. That's what I tell our clients. You walked into a trap. When you went to trial, you walked into a trap. I tell them that aside from yourself and your defense attorney, who hopefully was on your side, some, I wonder, and those that came to support you, everyone else in that courtroom was the state. The judges, the state, the bailiff, the court reporter, the clerk of court, the state. The prosecutor, the state. The witnesses, the state. And the jury, the state. Juries are chosen by the clerk of court, the state, using voter registration and DMV rolls. Again, the state. So you walked into a room full of people paid for by the state, and you thought you were going to get a fair trial, like we did. Nope. Didn't happen. You are in prison because the jury went in that room and came out and said guilty. That's why you got convicted. It is our purview that the convictions have little or nothing to do with the case. You get convicted because of the jury. The jury's in charge of the verdict. The jury decided. That's why you get convicted. Well, what if a juror or jurors swore to tell the truth during jury selection and then lied, like Rose? Did you get a fair trial? Not possible. When you go into a courtroom, and I'm sure you've seen courtroom scenes on TV if you've not been into an actual courtroom, normally the witness box is straight ahead, and you're sitting there at the defense table looking intently at the witnesses who are testifying against you. You are paying attention to everything they say. You are hanging on every word, trying to keep your focus on the witnesses, thinking that that's how you're going to either be declared innocent or you're going to be found guilty, is the witnesses. What you don't know is that off to the side, sometimes recessed back in the wall where you can barely see them, or maybe you can't see them at all, are the jurors. You are encouraged not to look over there. When they come and go, you stand and you put your head down. You don't look them in the eye. You don't watch them leave. You don't watch them come back. I've had people that went to trial, got convicted, and called me that night from the jail. One of the questions I asked them is, did you have 6 or 12 jurors? And they can't even tell me. 2 and 3 week-long murder trials, and they don't know if they had 6 or 12 jurors within hours of being convicted. Within hours of being convicted. Not only do you go into shock when you are convicted because you know you're innocent, but like I said, you are encouraged to just ignore the jury. Don't look at them. Don't pay attention. Just ignore them. That's how our courtrooms are designed. They are designed to keep the focus on the witness box and off the jury. But the jury is the key to the conviction. When Martin got out, he went back to driving over the road, and I had the pleasure of riding shotgun. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. We used to laugh every day and say we're as free as we can be on probation. While Martin's driving the semi-truck, I'm in the back with my laptop working on cases. We began to get very busy with that. So the next year, Martin quit his job and we opened the Office of Jury Investigations. The year after that, Martin designed the logo, we added Covert Ops to the title, and we became an LLC. Since that time, we have worked on 128 cases. 128 cases where we have located at least one biased juror in every jury. At least one, sometimes 2 and 3. Like I said, I did not choose to be a jury investigator. I chose Martin Peterson, and I chose to get my husband out. Oh yeah, by the way, we got married in prison in 2015. So that's a whole nother podcast. Now you know a little bit of the story of how Covert Ops jury investigations began. What started with an email and a phone call has turned into a company that helps people who are wrongfully convicted. Our criminal justice system tells you to argue your case and your innocence. The problem with that argument is the jury. The jury decided. And that's what we kept hearing for 4 years. The jury decided. The jury verdict is final. The verdict was tainted by a juror who came in and lied to the judge's face. Lied to everybody. That should matter. That's what you argue. You argue that your 6th and 14th constitutional amendments were violated when you had a juror who lied to get on your jury. Vigilante? Don't know, but they certainly had an agenda. If they were not biased, they would have told the truth. It's that simple. They would not have lied to a material question to get on the jury. They would have told the truth and risked being struck. I have read jury voir dire transcripts where the judges have actually joked about the fact that I know most of you, when you got your jury summons, you tried to scheme and plan and plot a way to get out of jury duty. Yes, that's what I did. Got a new job. Got a suit. Got to go to work. Can't be here. That wasn't even a legit reason, but our jurors have legitimate reasons to be excused from that particular case because they are inappropriate for that jury, and they sit there in silence and say nothing. Why? Oh, I have my theories. That's a whole nother podcast. When someone lies to get on your jury, the chances are that you don't have a chance of being found innocent. You will be convicted. And that's what we do at Covert Ops Jury Investigations, Inc. We look for liars for a living. If you know of someone who had a jury trial and needs our help getting back in the courthouse, you will find our contact information at the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I hope that you learned something. I also hope that you enjoyed hearing about the love story of MaryRose and Martin Peterson. Remember, the courtrooms may be silent, but we won't be. We will speak up. We will speak out. and we will always speak the truth.
Thank you, and God bless. That's all for now.
All it takes is one to convict an innocent person. One Trojan juror, one biased agenda, one hidden motive. That's why we investigate juries. We identify the sinister players and expose them. Jury investigations. Our number one objective is to get you back into the courtroom, because a guilty verdict doesn't have to be the end of the story.